everyone. Welcome to a new post Super Bowl shows, post Riri halftime show, post. Well, that's about all the posts I have for you. So good that you've decided to come back and join us this Sunday. We're back with a new edition of Remixing Politics and Culture with me, your host Pam. I'm so thankful that you've chosen to spend some time with me this evening. Just so you know, if this is your first time uh, tuning in or listening to the show, I am a public relations and marketing professional with a passion for social justice, voter advocacy, and culture. And I present this program on Sunday evenings live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I'm trying to keep talking to get more of you into the audience because a lot of people tend to come in a little bit. I try to start on time and what have you, but I have dropped the link in the chat for those of you who are the on YouTube and wish to make comments in the live section, and also for those of you who, as we get the conversation going, you want to excuse me one second, you want to participate in the show and come up on stage, we can do that as well. Okay, so I'm trying to see if more people are tuned in. I can't really tell right now, but I am going to tell you a little bit about my very special guest this evening. She and I met on Twitter several years ago, actually, and I don't know if you've probably met people on social media and you just hit it off. You know that you hit it off through chat and what have you. So she is a most dynamic woman from the Bronx, New York. She is the Reverend Dr. Deborah Jenkins. I'm going to bring her up as I talk about her. Deborah, you ready? Deborah? Okay.
1 second, Pam. 1 second.
Okay, well, I'm going to still introduce you while we're talking. Okay, so Reverend Dr. Deborah Jenkins is the founding pastor of Faith at Work Christian Church. And she is a leader in her community, and that is with several exclamation points. She has founded the Leaders and Scholars After School Hub and the Faith STEAM Camp as a community outreach program of the church with an annual $80,000 budget. She serves as the New York Police Department clergy liaison in the 45th precinct to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. And we all know that we need a lot more of that. She is the co-founder of Daughters for Justice and the chief training developer for a training module for the New York Police Department. She is a 3-time published author. She completed her doctorate in 2017 and established the Presley Family Institute, which is a mentoring and training hub for the children of the formerly incarcerated. She developed the On Code Rapid Response Team established with Black and Latino males ages 18 to 24 to restore their communities after internal and external violence. She has some for-profit business ventures as well. Can you believe it? I mean, what doesn't she do? She's got a retail consortium of businesses that she's launched. She's launching the Sable TV network. You name it, she's doing it. And yes, on top of all of that, she is married with kids. And they're no longer little kids, so that's a good thing. No longer little kids. They can help mom. All right, so without further ado, here we have, welcome Dr. Jenkins to the show. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I really am excited to be here with you. And yes, we have known each other in cyberspace for so long, but it seems like real friendship. And I'm just grateful to be on your platform.
I am so thrilled to have you. So thrilled to have you. And you guys make sure that you participate in this chat because the show is nothing without your participation. All right. So let's just get down to it, Deborah, because with everything that I've read to the audience and when I looked at your bio, I was like, well, why does Deborah want to talk about reparations? And I thought that is so interesting. And then we had a talk,
Mhm.
girl. And I want you to tell the audience how it is that, excuse me, that you became involved in the matter of reparations.
Okay, absolutely. Because there, like you and I were discussing before, there are so many issues that uh, could attract our attention, but it seems like a normal progression for me. I'm a restorative justice expert by training, academic training, and also work on the ground. And let me say, living in New York, we are very homogenous.
Mhm,
But and when I say that, because other parts of the country don't necessarily have the multitude of ethnic groups as
mhm,
we do here in New York. And those who receive the greatest harm from the government, I'm just going to be general in stating the government, but of course, I'm specifically talking about the NYPD in terms of criminal justice.
mhm,
Um, and police reform needs are Black and Latinos.
mhm,
And I work and have always worked with both communities, but always putting Blacks first, right?
mhm,
um, when it came time to create a program like, say, Uncode Rapid Response Team, it was as a result of the great protest of 2020. But my work had always included working with the formerly incarcerated when they return home. We call them returning citizens. We don't really like to call them ex-offenders anymore, because if you are a returning citizen, that is supposed to bring with it certain privileges,
mhm,
meaning you should be able to vote. You should be able to reestablish yourself within your community or the community of your choice because of your citizenship. And
mhm,
so for many years, I've done that work. And what made me feel the need to morph into the greater reparations movement is the fact that there are great segments of returning citizens who are unable to access basic essentials and basic what do you call them, entitlements that we all as citizens have.
mhm,
And I realized that because I was working with them, that work also had to be extended to their children. As a child of a formerly incarcerated father, we had a lot of support. My mother being the greatest restorative justice advocate that I've ever known in my life. But we had what a lot of my formerly incarcerated children peers don't have, and their families. And so I started to connect it with the work that I was doing, as well as with biblical principles around restorative justice and reparations, and found that there is biblical precedents for reparations, but restorative justice is also a component of reparations. But in order to effectively do the work on behalf of the formerly incarcerated and their children, I
mhm.
felt that I needed to become a part of the bigger movement.
Of reparations.
Yes, yes, indeed.
That's interesting because I never would have connected the dots of restorative justice with reparations. But what I find interesting, I was watching the 13th Amendment, that uh, powerful documentary by, now,
Ava DuVernay.
yeah, Ava DuVernay. Yes, yes. And you begin to see how when they start talking about the slave patrols and how policing and things were evolving and how it came about, and how with the ending of slavery they would start, they meaning the white landholder owners and stuff, they would start picking up Black people on these minuscule charges and begin incarcerating them. And with their incarceration became a form of servitude yet again, but legal this time, right? Since
Mhm.
it was illegal. So and I had that aha moment because I didn't have that before. And thinking about what we were going to discuss and what have you, and I thought, wow, look at that. Look at how all of that connects the dots. And when you think of incarceration now, you've got for-profit prisons and all of those types of things, you really see how all of these things connect and intersect. But I, you know, I was doing some research on all of this, and I know um, you're going to get into some history for me, but I want to tell the audience that as of 2019, before the pandemic and America's racial reckoning of 2020, according to the Associated Press poll, only 29% of Americans agreed that the federal government should pay cash reparations, and only 46% believed that the government should even issue an apology for slavery. A 2021 poll had similar results. What do you think about that, Deborah?
Okay. I'm going to try to be very respectful on your platform. I don't have much use for those who fall into the category that did not say that cash reparations are due,
Mm-hmm.
and especially for those who said that an apology from the federal government is not due. It is, in fact, long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so offensive to me as an individual. I mean, so offensive when I say, I can't stress that enough, how offensive it is to imagine that there are, what would it be, 77% of those polled who did not believe that descendants of enslaved people in the United States are owed or deserve any type of reparations for the trauma that has been caused by this federal government against people who had no choice in coming here. And parenthetically, if the poll was real, if those numbers were really, really extrapolated all the way down, we
Mm-hmm.
would find that the majority of those same people are immigrants and
Mm-hmm.
came here by choice. For
Mm-hmm.
those of us who were a part of the transatlantic slave atrocity,
Mm-hmm.
we had no, our family, our ancestors had no choice. So I'm very, very offended by those statistics, while at the same time I don't really care what they say, right? I really don't care, because there's a litany of reparations that have been paid. In fact, this same government went to Europe to ensure that the people known as the Jewish, who were part of the Holocaust,
Mm-hmm.
would receive reparations. So they matter not to me. It just incenses me, because that just shows us, Pam, how little we continue to be considered and thought of in this country.
And in fact, we've done reparations in the U.S. And I was going to,
Absolutely.
of course, what they did for the Jewish people, and what Germany had to pay them and pay Israel, and in another organization as well. But in the U.S., we've done reparations. Here in America, just literally only 35 years ago, in 1988, we gave $20,000 to the surviving 60,000 Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II, and they were issued an apology as well. They,
Absolutely. Right here from
yes.
the federal government.
Yes,
And
they
and,
did.
and let me go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I want to read Dawn Kelly has been chiming in. She said her first comment, they arrested the freedmen, and then she said the menthol ban is dangerous. may be a way for them to arrest people again. I have a whole nother thing about this legalization of marijuana and all that. That's another thing. She says,
Mm.
polling us. Dawn has just been lighting up. Apologies and cash are overdue to the descendants of the enslaved. Dawn, by the way, is in Jamaica, Queens, New
Hi,
York.
Dawn.
Yeah,
Waving from the boogie down.
she's got a fabulous business there called the Nourish Spot. So
The nurse.
you and your family have to go there and see my girl. Let's see.
Okay,
You have
absolutely.
NYS Assemblywoman Nikki Lucas and a woman from California named Friday Jones as additional voices on this important subject. Absolutely, Dawn. I did some research on what they're doing in California, and it's absolutely amazing. Because in fact, we don't have to really reinvent the whole wheel because California is doing a lot. Gavin Newsom signed for them to go ahead and do their study on this whole thing, but we'll get into that. Loretta says, thanks, Dr. Jenkins. Those polls, interesting statistics are offensive. Yeah. Dawn,
Absolutely.
today, what happened today, Dawn? She must be talking about what happened in New York, NYS. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, they had the conference this entire weekend. I don't know the results of it. I was not there. But yes,
Mhm.
she mentioned Friday Jones, who is I think she's the founder of the NAASD out
Uh-huh.
in California. They have been very instrumental in pushing forward
Mhm.
the reparations task force and getting the information out to
Mhm.
the citizens out there. So shout out to NAASD, Friday Jones. She was here this weekend presenting along with the United Freedmen's Project, which is located here in New York, with the president being Divine Prince, and others, Tony Blount and others. So hopefully that all went well.
Okay. And Latrice Davis. Latrice is also your homegirl. She's also in New York. She's in Queens. She's in Queens. Latrice, do you have any thoughts on Bruce Beach? California recently returned land to their descendants who in turn sold it back for 20 million. Yeah, I heard
Yeah,
that story. What are your thoughts on that, Latrice?
yeah. You know what? I am hard pressed to criticize the family. You know, I really am.
Mhm.
Um, just like our politics are different here, Latrice, and Dawn, in New York. I really don't understand the totality of politics in the state of California. That's why I'm being very attentive to what is going on with the task force,
Mhm.
because there will be some elements that New York can use, right? But as it relates to the Bruce family getting the property back and then selling it,
Mhm.
they've received a lot of criticism. I am not one of those people to criticize them simply because I don't know what their needs are.
Mhm.
um I would, not having that type of property, I would say, oh my goodness, I need to maintain that property for my offspring and their offspring and their offspring and theirs. But
Mhm.
I don't know what's going on with that family. I'm sure the lawsuit was quite costly. I really don't know. So I'm
Mhm.
not copping out. I'm just trying not to hold them, hold judgment against them, because I really don't know,
Right.
I hope that helps.
Yeah. And too, and to be honest with you, unless you have some definite plans of what you want to do with that amount of property, maybe it's better to make the money from it, get your restitution that way and move on. Just
It- it- yeah, I
you know.
mean, yeah, I mean, like I said, I commend all of the work that the task force and those who are helping them.
Mhm.
Another organization out there, CJAC, in California, doing the same type of work as NASD, as well as others. Uh, I don't want to wade too deep into the waters of why that family turned around and sold it back to California. I really, because I don't know. Let me tell you, there's a case, not a case, is floating around on Instagram about this family that owned a black family upstate New York, guys, who owned like 243 acres of land, which is
Right.
also unheard of, especially in a state like this. They just
Right.
sold it to developers for $13 million.
Only
I
30 million for 200 and some
exactly.
acres?
Exactly,
Only
Pamela. That's
13
what
million?
I was saying. That's what I was saying. If developers offered them 13 million,
Uh-huh.
it had to be worth at least double, perhaps triple for what they're going to be able to develop it for. But do you see, Latrice, how my attitude is different because this is New York and we sort of understand things differently here than the dynamics in California. I'm not criticizing this family either. Again, I'm not in their pockets, so I don't know what they needed in terms of that sale. But that seems like a very lowball price that they sold that
Yeah.
much land for. So
Yeah.
that, I don't know what else to say on that one.
And it could be the advisors. Yeah, even Donna's saying only 13 million. That's just crazy. Latrice,
Yeah.
she fair enough, she understood, and Donna's saying, "Oh God, that's so sad."
I
Listen,
know.
so one thing that you and I chatted about, Dr. Jenkins, was that we chatted about how the UN and W.E.B. Du Bois. You're gonna give us, okay, guys, listen up for this interesting history lesson that Dr.
Okay.
is gonna give.
Okay. So there's so much. I was trying not to, even when we were talking in the lead up to this, it was like speed talking because there's so much to this. But needless to say, I've already mentioned in passing that there is definite, for those of us who are believers, I'm a biblicist, meaning that I typically take the Bible literally, and there's also dissenters from that, but I do. And there is biblical precedence for reparations for those who need it. But for me, as a social justice advocate like yourself, Pam, I
Mhm,
didn't need it to necessarily align with biblical principles. That just made it that much stronger, my fight for it. But
mhm.
when it comes to what has gone on before, let me talk about, if you don't mind, if I could start with,
Absolutely.
I call Callie House. Remember we spoke about her briefly?
Yes, very briefly, yes. But
Yes. Okay. May I start there and bring it forward, or should I start with the Emancipation Proclamation? Um, and then that's just a couple of sentences, because I think what my goal is to educate our people. You
mhm,
know, we are so emotional. We're an emotional people, but we need to be armed with facts and education. I believe in research. And so I like to put my arguments, back it up with history. So the
right.
Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Lincoln, right? January 1st, 1863.
Mhm,
However, the Union had not won the war until April of 1865. So in essence, our people, our ancestors weren't freed until December, all of them, December of 1865, which is why we celebrate Juneteenth, right? Because all of them didn't even receive the word
mhm,
um, right away. So December 1865 was really when they were emancipated or made free. And let
mhm.
me say again, when you were talking about the Japanese being the 60,000 Japanese receiving reparations, and I have no problem with that. They deserved it, right?
Deserved
Did
it,
you,
absolutely.
did you all know that President Lincoln, before making Washington, D.C. a free territory, he paid reparations to those slaveholders because they were about to lose their free labor? And, when we went to school, we were taught that he was the best thing since sliced bread. And
Right.
he's always been held up as this stalwart abolitionist, when in essence he really wasn't. Our children went to school and they learned the truth, but we were fed a lie. So I want to just let people know that President Lincoln himself
Mhm.
ensured that those slave owners in Washington, D.C. would receive reparations for the loss of the free labor of our ancestors.
I just
When,
learned that myself. I
yeah,
didn't, I didn't
yeah.
learn school. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so moving forward, after after we're emancipated, now Miss Callie House was born into slavery at the tail end. She was born in 1861, and I want to shout out the chairwoman of the California Task Force for even introducing me to Miss Callie House through the wonderful book called My My Face is Black is True by Dr. Mary Frances Berry. It is an
Oh.
excellent book, and I really recommend that everybody reads that so you can
Mhm.
get an understanding. But Miss Callie House, born into slavery, freed when all were freed, um, but she was committed. She was not an educated woman, but she was a smart person, just
Mhm.
like most, if not all, Black people are, in my opinion. We're some of the smartest people on the face of the earth and always have been. But she was born into slavery. What she realized, out of the 4 million who were being emancipated, who were being set free, that many of them were elderly. Many of them would not be able to work any longer. At
Mhm.
that time, there was a huge groundswell around giving a pension to elderly people who had also fought in the wars. The nation was totally in favor of that. So she said, well, if they can have it, not to begrudge them, then the emancipated free people should also be able to receive a pension. She fought hard and hard and hard, and she co-founded the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. It's a long title, but if you get the book, you'll hear about it over and over again.
A
She
black
co
woman did that, founded that.
Yes, Miss Callie House. And I say Miss, but she was married. Mrs. Callie House. She just took it upon herself. Her parents themselves were elderly. She was a washerwoman, so
Yes.
she was still working, right?
Yes.
But she knew that so many of them would never be able to work again because they had been beaten down by slavery, right?
Yes.
And so she thought it was only fair, and we're not talking about a lot of money here, but she thought it was only fair that they too should receive a pension.
Right.
Before you know it, she's grown this organization into the hundreds of thousands of Black people across the country who
Re-
also agree with her. Hundreds of thousands. I want to say 300,000, but I certainly can be wrong. But it was a lot of us, a lot of our ancestors, right? She's out of Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay.
So she builds this organization up,
Mhm.
and then in 1915, she files the very first reparations lawsuit. It was a class action lawsuit
Mhm.
against the federal government by this organization to pay pensions to these formerly enslaved people.
Right.
And of course, the Supreme Court, being the Supreme Court, denied it, saying that they could not hold the federal government responsible for this lawsuit. So it didn't go anywhere. But the very next year in 1916, she was imprisoned for 1 year. She was in prison for 1 year. And why? Because the manner in which she grew the organization was through mail, membership through mail. And they charged her with mail fraud. And they put,
Oh my God.
it's crazy. I know it's crazy, Pam. They put her in jail for a year. Um, and she came out, and that was that. But I'm happy to share with you and your audience that last year,
Mhm.
professors I have so many more notes about Miss Callie House, but it's not enough time. Last year,
Keep going.
last year, Harvard professors were in September. I'm so sorry. I want to read my notes so that I don't get it wrong. Harvard professors Ronald Sullivan and Cornell Williams Brooks submitted a petition to President Biden to posthumously pardon Miss Callie House. And as of today, we are still waiting. This was just September. I know that there's a very long process, but I'm so proud of Harvard University doing this on Miss Callie House's behalf and the students working with Professors Sullivan and Williams Brooks. And we hope that it will, turn out in favor of Miss House, that she will be posthumously pardoned. If you ask me, I feel like Andrew Johnson, President
Yeah.
Johnson, he needs to be posthumously impeached.
Mhm.
But that's a whole nother
That's
discussion,
a
Pam.
whole other story because I read the thing about when Union General Sherman said, okay, he's the guy who came up with the 40 acres and the mule thing to give to the enslaved people. And they thought that they were going to get some type of compensation, but of course, when Lincoln was assassinated, then Andrew Jackson took over, and he literally said that this was a white man's country. Literally, I had his quote on another screen that this was a white man's country, and he by no means was given us anything.
Yeah.
So, but of course, also a footnote is that Andrew Jackson was definitely Trump's man. You would see his portrait hung up over him and stuff. But this Callie House, she sounds like such a remarkable woman, another hidden figure that we don't
Yes.
readily know of. So,
Right.
so tell us more. What about, let me ask you this. In doing some research, I was noticing that some people were talking about uh, rehabilitative reparations, meaning reparations that would be free tuition, zero interest mortgage loans, things like that, that weren't necessarily paid. It could be a combination of both in terms of reparations.
Mhm.
What do you think about rehabilitative reparations?
Okay, so starting there, that is the fifth condition that the UN defines out of their five elements of reparations. If I can start at the first one and get to rehabilitation, because that's where my work has centered in the fifth. Cessation, meaning that there's an assurance and a guarantee of non-repetition, that it will not ever happen again, right?
Mhm,
Restitution, and repatriation. I think that that's more of a global, the restitution and repatriation can be seen more for the diaspora, because some people have literally, and we too have been literally displaced. But you know what, Pam? There are these arguments in the reparations space around our home. We've
mhm,
been here in the United States as descendants from enslaved people who came from the continent of Africa for more than 400 years. I don't, and I do my ancestry.com. I haven't done African ancestry yet, right?
mhm.
But this is home right now. And so, and it has been. This is all we know. Where would we repatriate to? You know
No,
what I'm saying? And
nowhere.
nowhere. This is it. This is where we have to center our fight
Mhm,
for reparations now. And so that repatriation piece is really for those who've been displaced more recently, I would say.
mhm,
um so the third one is the compensation. That is the one that has everybody with their pennies in a bind, thinking that Black people might actually receive some equity in this country if
mhm,
we give them some money. You're not giving us anything.
mhm,
Anything that we've ever gotten, we've paid for or we've earned. We've never had a free ride. That's the third. Satisfaction is that apology that you were talking about. I have an expression that I coined, I believe. I'm not sure if I actually coined it, but in the church, that there
mhm,
can be no reconciliation
mhm,
without repentance. There needs to be an apology to Black people for what they did to us, what this country has done to us. And
mhm,
but that hasn't come. And the fifth is rehabilitation, as you were speaking about. So it's not only about housing equity, while it is a huge deal. There is Evanston, Illinois. If you spoke to many of the people in Evanston, Illinois, that is
mhm,
where their reparations focused. And many of the people who I've heard in YouTube interviews and Twitter spaces, they're not really happy with what they've received. In fact, most recently, I heard someone say that how can that be considered rehabilitation or reparations when you're giving $20,000 housing vouchers, but it has to be used with a specific company, and that company is held by Caucasians. It
Yeah,
doesn't make sense to me, Pam.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
It's
what
like they want to make sure that that money turns over and recycles in their system versus our system. What would make more sense is that it would go to a black realtor or real
absolutely
developer
developers,
or something
yes.
like that, so that money would regenerate within the community.
The community, yes, absolutely. And even going back to Miss House, you'd be surprised to know that the infamous Edmund Pettis,
Yeah.
he had supported her. He supported her in her fight, but it was not altruistic at all. He is infamous for a reason. He
Mhm.
thought that if I support her and they get this pension, then it'll just go right back into the white hands because they'll be buying their essentials from white store owners and property owners and everything. So it was nothing to say, oh wow, he wasn't as bad as we thought he was. He was as bad as we thought because he was scheming and conniving how the white people could maintain anything that the black people would get. And so when you think about housing equity as a part of the rehabilitation, absolutely it should be. However, we have to be very careful how it looks because if Evanston stands as an example, then we need to go back to the drawing board.
Mhm.
Um, as it relates to my work in rehabilitation, it is the work with the formerly incarcerated and their children. It is the work of ensuring that all of these jobs that are being forecast as for the next 5 to 10 years, that
Mhm.
Blacks can be trained to access those jobs and
Mhm.
be able to make a living. And that my work really centers around young people, 18, 24. That's what the Uncode Rapid Response Team focuses on, specifically males, but not excluding women at all.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow.
Pam, can I say one more thing about rehabilitation? I'm so sorry.
Listen, please, you are schooling us, and that's why I have you on here all by your lonesome, so that
Well, thank
just that. So go have at
you.
it,
All
please.
right. So here's another piece of rehabilitation that I think gets lost in the conversation often. Our babies who are in foster care. Our
Mm,
babies who are in foster care.
mhm,
Um, I recently, at the invitation of a really good friend of mine, she's actually a co-founder of Daughters for Justice, which you mentioned in the bio.
mhm,
She is doing her PhD right now. Her name is Prophetess Only Love Alston. She is a professor at Columbia School of Social Work here in New York.
mhm,
Columbia has a horrible record on slavery. But that's a whole other discussion too. Been doing my research on them. But anyway, I had to go. She invited me to come and present to her students. And I thought that was wonderful. Not because she just wanted me to come, but because the majority of social work, the social work profession, I believe 83% of the social work profession is Caucasian. Only 19.9% are Black. When we have children in foster care
they're
in New
mostly
York,
us. They're mostly us in the country.
mostly us, right?
Color,
you
yes.
we have to be able to impact on those who will be ignoring their needs, their emotional and intergenerational trauma that passes down, as Dr. Joy DeGruy has said so perfectly in her groundbreaking book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. So I had an opportunity to present to them, and it was so interesting. And I'm not sure the professor is watching tonight because I don't know if she's had an opportunity to do the playback. But one of her students, and this is what I want to caution all of us about when we are talking about these allies.
Mm.
Watch their language, watch their speech. So one of her students, when the Q&A period came about,
Mm-hmm.
what she said to me was, she said, so how is this transfer of wealth supposed to take place?
Mm-hmm.
So by her using the phrase transfer of wealth,
Yeah.
it was an immediate indicator to me that she will be in that 77% that you spoke about, who does not believe that we deserve
Mm-hmm.
reparations. And I'm pretty sure, and I think I took a poll in that class, I'm not positive, how many of you are second, third generation here? And
Mm-hmm.
I went through all the numbers and I told them about Dr. William Darity, whose book I recommend also highly, like I do My Face is Black is True. She has it. She has it. I hope Dr. Darity is watching because
Sign.
I
You know what? What my pastor had he and his wife on. He did a little he did an interview with them because he was in Duke's Divinity School because Dr. Purdy is at Duke. And I said,
yeah.
when you sent me those books, I said,
Mhm.
the Darities, and he wrote to me. He says, "Thanks for all of your PR help. You're extremely talented. Keep up the good work." And I had forgotten that I had promoted through our.
Wow.
But yeah, I wanted to show the book, so give them a
From
plug.
here to from
Yeah,
here to eternity by Dr. William Sandy Darity and his beautiful wife,
yeah,
Dr. Kirsten Mullen. They
yeah,
are
yes.
and that's what this is one of the economists of note. They are one of the economists. They are both two of the economists of note that this movement builds its calculations around.
Uh-huh.
I have never had the pleasure of physically meeting him or Dr. Mullen, but I respect and revere their work so highly, and they deserve all the praise that anyone gives them. And I hope that your congregation was emboldened and enlightened in a favorable way when they made their presentation. But that, so I shared with the young lady that based upon Dr. Darity's calculations, the figures that I had presented in the presentation were his and
Mhm.
Dr. Mullen, and that just like right now, what we're experiencing with Ukraine, and this is exactly what I said to her, the same way we are supporting Ukraine without any questions being asked on the left or the right,
Billions upon billions of
billions upon billions,
yes.
without question. They can do it. They can do it. This government can do it. We do far less for people far less deserving. And so I watch the language, but as it relates to our kids, they are never considered when they want they're so. I worked in this field when I began my my professional career years ago. I worked in child welfare, and that's where I got my passion for Black boys,
Mhm.
because I saw that the Black girls were able to manage life after foster care, but the Black boys and even the Latino boys, they weren't faring as well as their female counterparts. And so I've always done programming around them. But so rehabilitation as it relates to the formerly incarcerated and their children, and rehabilitation as it relates to our children, our vulnerable children who are in foster care and are up for adoption. They need to be adopted by Black people so that they don't lose what culture we do have. And
Yes.
we have a rich culture. But this has to be a big part of our ask in terms of rehabilitation. And that's my strong position. The
Mm,
housing, the foster care,
mm,
and restoration through criminal justice reform and police reform.
mhm, mhm. I'll have to share with you the work that I do for a social services agency. So I know all about foster care and child
Yes.
prevention month and a national adoption month and all of that. Special heart for all social workers. I so admire them. Um,
Yes.
you know what I want you to do? What we didn't get into was that when W.E.B. Du Bois
Right.
to United Nations about
Yes, yes.
reparations. Tell the audience about that, Dr. Jenkins.
Okay, sure. So what Pam is referring to is another groundbreaking work. Um, I would say led by Paul Robeson
Hmm.
rather than W.B. Du Bois, because I believe he was out of the country at the time when they were submitting the petition entitled "We Charge Genocide"
Hmm.
to the UN, as they were having a conclave about, or a convocation, convention around genocide.
Hmm.
It was a petition signed by Robeson, W.B. Du Bois, and several spouses or children or family members of um, fallen blacks who had been killed at the hand of the government.
Hmm.
And it was so interesting, Pam. It is a book too. It's called "We Charge Genocide." It has a subtitle.
Who wrote
But
that,
what's
um,
mhm.
Deborah? Who wrote that book? We Church Genocide.
Well, it's the petition itself. It's the petition itself
Okay.
in book form, but
Okay.
it has a red cover. And I want to give you a little more. Oh, here we go. So this was in 1951, y'all. So this was just over 70 years ago. And
Hmm.
another person who we've been taught to hold out as some hero or heroine is former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh.
She
Uh-huh.
she was staunchly against it, and what did she call it? I want to quote her correctly now. What did
Oh.
she say about it? She called it ridiculous. And we know that her wording, her language expression was far greater than one word responses. But that's how she responded to "We Charge Genocide," the petition presented to the UN. It's called "We Charge Genocide, the crime of the government against the Negro people." And
Hmm.
so this nation, even those so-called allies, have been in denial.
Hmm.
And I don't even really think it's denial. It's just a willful desire to violate the first principle of the UN, to
Hmm.
seek the cessation, to stop the harm. Do you realize the longer we wait for
Hmm.
reparations, the more harm that's caused to
Yeah.
us as a people? In
Hmm.
fact, the Department of State had enlisted the NAACP to
Hmm.
draft a rebuttal against it. But then when Roy Wilkins he was president at the time, when he thought about what was included in the petition, it was many of their talking points as the NAACP. It was many of the cases that they had stood and defended Black people who had been harmed and killed and lynched about. And so while they did draft it,
Hmm.
they never published it because I guess they couldn't lose the credibility. But understand how the government works against us, even when we believe we have these civil rights legacy organizations working on our behalf, and
Yes.
they're not always doing so. So I'm not one for touting the civil rights legacy organizations, because I know how easily manipulated they are. And by it's not truly manipulation for them, because they get remuneration. What they do is manipulate us, those who have looked to them to be out there on our behalf. And I have to say, I don't think that there are any so-called legacy organizations, civil rights organizations,
Hmm.
nor the Congressional Black Caucus, which are really operating on behalf of Black Americans. And
Mm.
it's really hurtful. They're not. Um, um, Again, back to refer back to New York, every nationality here is here, right? Not
Yes.
necessarily throughout the country, but just because there's another person who is as dark as I am or as light as you are, does
Hmm.
not mean that they are descendants of enslaved people in the United States. They may have descended from enslaved people, but
Right.
not here in the United States. Our fight is in this country first. And
Yes.
so when they try to make it be as if we are all one black people,
Mm-hmm.
we as descendants of enslaved people, we have to reject that. And
Mm-hmm.
we have to reject it without apology. Now, does that mean that we hate other people who look like us? I don't.
No,
Some do. I don't.
no.
I don't. And even Puerto Ricans
Mm-hmm.
and Dominicans. And I say that because it's more of them here in New York, a lot more of them
Mm-hmm.
than perhaps other Latinos. I can work with them. I have lived with them my entire life in New York City, have not been harmed by either. But
Yeah.
I always have allegiance first to Black Americans. I have to. And I do that without apology, but we have to do the same thing. And so we have to stop always being so proud of all these first, right? Because guess what, Pam? The first don't look like you and I. They are not us. They are not descendants of enslaved people in the United States. And so once they get into these first positions, guess what the first thing they do? They take on the character of white supremacy and forget about those like our ancestors who made it possible for them to rise to the levels that they have. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just you, if we went down the list of elected Black American descendants,
Mm-hmm.
we would not find many. We would not find many. And that's fine if they stand in unity with Black Americans. I haven't seen much of that, but I hold out hope.
Mm. You know, and when you said that about the descendants of the enslaved people in California's Reparations Commission, they
Hmm.
have determined that um that Black Californians who are descendants of enslaved African Americans or of a free Black person living in the U.S. prior to the end of the 19th century, they would be eligible for the monetary reparations. So they've dug that deep so far as to determine who among them, African Americans that there in California would be eligible for the money reparations. I thought
Yeah.
that
Oh,
was
that's incredible. Yeah. It's
interesting.
called delineation. And they had a very, you can go back and see some of their hearings. It was a very heated, testy type of conclusion that they had to get there because there was opposition. And
Hmm.
so, listen, here's my thing. I believe in lineage based reparations without question.
Hmm.
Because again, for those who don't know, for the Caribbean islands, including Dominican Republic
Yes.
and Haiti, there is a body for the Dominican Republic. I mean, for the 19 countries included, it's called CARICOM. That is not covering the United States. And
Hmm.
that's why we're so fractured here. That's
Hmm.
why you have organizations like a nasty out in California, or CJAC in California, or other reparations organizations throughout the country
Hmm.
that are fighting on behalf of lineaged people, Blacks who can trace their lineage back to enslaved people here in the United States. And that's why the messaging cannot be overlapping. CARICOM is where anyone in those 19 nations, including the Dominican Republic, like I
Uh-huh.
said, have to
Right.
go to CARICOM, not seek their reparations from the United States. That's what we're doing on behalf of ourselves and our enslaved ancestors here.
I
So,
had no idea there were all of these different organizations going up for reparations. I mean, you're schooling us. And maybe some of you guys in the audience knew about it already and stuff, but I didn't know. Let's see. Loretta says, agreed about our civil liberties organizations have become entrapped.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, they really have. I mean, you know how I was just sharing about the NACP. They were about they literally far as to draft the press release against We Charge Genocide. But just recently, the NAACP, the national NAACP, had to be
Mhm.
shamed into helping save a sovereign. Well, I won't say sovereign because the nation is supposed to be sovereign, but a black town um, um, called Mason, Tennessee, had to be shamed into supporting them.
Seems like I
Uh,
remember Roland Martin doing a story on Mason, Tennessee, but I can't remember what had happened in Mason. What happened in Mason, Tennessee? They lost their
yeah,
water. I don't know. Something weird happened.
no. So what happened in Mason was the attorney general, the state attorney general, was going to take their charter away from them. They've
Mhm,
had that charter for over 100 years, and that town is predominantly black. Their leadership is and was black.
mhm,
Their mayor, their vice mayor, um, and they were going to revoke it because before the current mayor or the mayor at the time, I haven't been talking to them recently, but I know they've had elections. Believe he was reelected. But the his predecessor and the predecessor before him, they had been stealing money and not paying that's the water part that you were talking about. They had
mhm,
not been paying the water bill. And so this under his administration, they had actually been very proactive in repaying it to the state. They understood that this was a debt owed to the state and they were not trying to run from it. But this man decided that he was just going to just take their charter, but it was much deeper than that because Ford just opened a huge plant,
mhm.
very close to Mason, and that's it right there.
The
They,
money.
the money,
That's
and
what was.
go ahead, Pam.
That I'm just remembering what Roland was saying about that plant. When you said that, that just triggered it in my head. It was the
Yeah,
money that
it
was
was
going
that.
to come from that because it was right there adjacent to them, or some
Yeah.
kind. It was going to be their tax base.
Yes,
That's.
because they needed to use their water resources. I'm pretty sure I'm not calling it the right thing.
Mhm,
It did have to do with their water resources.
mhm,
Um, Ford would need to use it, which means what? They'd have to pay on the town of Mason. So it was a huge deal. But
mhm.
I'm not going to give Mr. Martin, who cursed me out on Twitter, credit for. I'm just telling the truth here. Um, I won't give him credit.
Mhm,
It was a grassroots effort
mhm,
started on Twitter by
mhm,
people who didn't even live in Mason who said, we're not going to allow this to happen
mhm.
to a black town like this. And
Right.
they did a GoFundMe. It was led by a sister whose Twitter moniker is KD.
Uh-huh.
She did that, and the grassroots black activists via Twitter raised all this money for them and helped them. But yeah, so I said all of that to say really that the NACP, as the leading legacy organization, and parenthetically, when Miss Callie House was experiencing her issues, they didn't come to her aid either. And we know who the founders of that was. So I won't, you know, I have a love hate relationship with one of the founders as a student of his work, but we have to actually just stand with our own. We
What
have to stand with our own.
do you though? What do you think that is? Why we, if we could just stick together, we
Yeah,
would be powerful. What is
absolutely.
that?
You
What
know what?
is
I'm going to tell you like this. There's others always have money that they can dangle in our faces, money, positions, titles, all of those things. While we're
Mhm,
trying to galvanize each other to be unified, we really
mhm.
don't have a long history of trusting each other, right? So
Right.
the others can always exploit that against us. And
Mhm,
even right now, the reparations movement, while there's a groundswell around it, it is very much divided, very much divided. But I always say, look, if it's being talked about, this is your thing, right? PR. If it's
mhm,
being talked about, it's good, right? As
mhm,
long as it's staying out there in the ethers. But someone can be offered money, someone could be offered position or a title, and
Mhm.
that'll get us to turn on each other. And when you're not in it, when you're not doing what you're doing for the
Mhm.
people,
Mhm.
I'm about this four generations thing, Pam. I'm serious. I'm always running numbers, trying to make sure that as I pass it along to my children, who we
Mhm.
came, my children were little when you and I became friends.
I
Um,
know.
and they've not had children yet, but they are getting to that age. I'm trying to make sure that I pass enough along to them so that they can
Mhm.
pass it on to theirs and theirs to them. Theirs. Here's the thing I need your audience to hear is that economists have on both sides, all around, have
Mhm.
predicted that by the year 2053, y'all, by the year
Mhm.
2053, the Black net worth, median net worth will be zero, will be zero. And so that's why we cannot, at our, as my sister calls me, seasoned age,
Mhm.
um, desire to sell each other out. We
Right.
cannot try to get the spotlight because this is not for us. This is
Right.
for those who are coming behind us. But
Right.
they know how we've operated and they know that we'll turn on each other very easily. And it's sad.
It is very sad. Latrice says the first step toward solving a problem is admitting that you have one. Willful ignorance is why America has regressed politically. Exhibit A.
Yes.
Ron DeSantis, Ron DeSatan.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Wow. I can't believe zero net
Zero.
worth.
Zero. So what are we talking, Pam? 30 years. 30 years.
How did we get to zero though? I don't get that. How you get to zero?
Well, since I'm not an economist, I won't even go into how they got to that number because I won't be able to speak about it intelligently. However, what I will say is that um, it was accelerated. That time frame was actually accelerated by the pandemic because we lost so many, you know. And so we're talking 30 years, Pam. We're talking a mere 30 years. And I can remember back in the 90s thinking 30 years away, we were all thinking about everything crashing in terms of computers with the turn of the century. And that didn't happen
Yes.
up so quickly. And so we really have to take this education piece to each other, keep
Mhm.
passing on the information so that people can understand why there's an urgency of now, why we say reparations now and not
Yeah.
later.
Yes, yes, yes. And passing on knowledge, everybody listening, whether you're listening live now or if you listen on the replay, share this video because I guarantee you have not heard talk about reparations in this format before. The last time we had a talk on reparations, it was a wonderful chat and it came from a different perspective from another minister friend of, and it was excellent because he had been a pastor out there in Oklahoma in Tulsa, the church that was the only remaining building standing during the Tulsa massacre. So he had a different perspective, and everybody has their own perspective, but it's so important that we have these conversations. Dawn Daly Mack, she says, I remember my father telling me that my generation would be the first to experience downward mobility. It makes sense to me. And Dawn is the, I don't know if Dawn is over an NAACP branch out in Eastern North Carolina. Um, she just got that appointment. Let's see.
Congratulations.
Wow. So fiscal year 2053, I concur teaching our children financial literacy legacy. Also relatives about financial future I will share. Yes, please. Guys, you can share all my videos. Share this video, share whatever, because I really, one thing that I'm proud of, and it is a lot of work, and I have 70 million things that I'm doing, but the whole goal of doing this show was to educate people on, for us to think, because a lot of people don't watch the regular news. They don't even read the regular news. But I feel that if we bring people on in this type of format, people will watch it, they'll listen or whatever and share information. And you don't have to be a national figure to be spouting truth and information. You can be just regular folks here and there and everywhere with information here. Oh, Judy, I missed your comment. Net worth at zero means we owe more than we own. It's very possible. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not me. Possible. Yeah. Deborah, so tell me, what are your next steps, Dr. Jenkins? Because we're friends, I'm calling you by first.
Yeah, that's right.
What are your next steps in your research in this whole reparations module that you're working on?
Yes. So I want to continue and I will continue to educate our people. I'm not, I'm gonna leave the allies and other groups to other people because I really want us to be knowledgeable about why it's important. So important. In fact, it is Generation Z that's really sort of pushing this. It's not because they see the baby boomers and the group that was right before them, and I don't know what they call that, the silent generation, perhaps, and
Mhm,
also some of my generation, the older Generation X people,
mhm,
yeah, Generation X people, as gatekeepers and those who have squandered all this power that we've had. But so
mhm,
they are just really out there pushing it. But I want them to be educated. I want them to have some talking points that are based in facts, and that's why
mhm,
I'll keep doing that. But in terms of my research, I did recently start a research, a funded research project to um, explore all of the colleges and universities in the Northeast that
mhm,
enslaved our ancestors. And like I said, I started with Columbia University, and it's just ugly. And understand, even when I put together the book on this, on my findings,
mhm.
understand that while myself and my research assistant are doing this work, guess what we're being traumatized
Yes,
over and
yeah.
over again. But I do this because I think it's very important that in terms of that whole rehabilitation piece, we are able to get more of our children into colleges and
Mhm,
into trainings, right? But also to uncover the lies that have just been told, and we need to be reckoned. We need to reckon, and have this country reckon with it. So I'm going to continue the research, but I'll continue to go around the country as invited to speak this message and give these basic truths that are small enough, in small enough chunks that people can run with it and go and tell a neighbor, and they tell a neighbor, so they can
mhm,
understand why it is that those of us who are out here leading the way
mhm.
are doing what we're doing.
Right. I tell you, I listen, we became friends years ago on Twitter, and now
Yeah.
y'all you can see why. She is the truth. She is the
Thank
truth.
you, Pam.
Dr. Deborah Jenkins. We
Thank
are
you.
we are over time, almost 10 minutes over
I'm
time.
sorry.
No, 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 no. Let's see. Dawn says the ones that will push it, still others are disconnected. That's okay. But you know what? Even if they're disconnected, you guys, this listening audience, you can push it. I can push it. Everybody can push information out to others, and each one can teach one. And that's
Yes.
one thing that we are blessed with the internet, which this technology that we're using now, I learned that it was a black woman who invented this technology that we're using right now. I think her
Oh,
last name is Cloak, I believe. Marsha Cloak. I don't want to get her name wrong, but yeah, a phenomenal sister, and she did so as an engineer for AT&T, where she
wow.
had several patents and was just inducted into the Inventor Hall of Fame and all of that. All of the Skype, how we're communicating now. This is
Wow, that's awesome.
this
See,
is
we're great. We're just great.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, listen, guys, I hope you in the listening audience, whether you're here on live or you're playing this back, that you have gained something from this conversation, gotten some real history lessons about reparations. And and the different forms of reparations, and learned a little bit what happened in, was it Evanston, Illinois?
Yes.
Evanston,
Evanston. Hmm.
Illinois, with their reparations, and what California is doing now, which I'm really excited about with their uncovering and what have you, and what Dr. Deborah Jenkins is uncovering with her research and informing people. So you all have a wonderful night. God bless. Let's wave them off, Deborah. Good night, everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for coming, and tune in next week for another great show. Bye bye.
Thanks, Pamela.